Season 10 of Death Battle was a season that had a lot of high expectations going into it. Between the mix-up in schedule in terms of episode releases, to the huge amount of abnormal episode matchups and new franchises that made their debut this year, and being the debut of the Champion Ballot episodes voted for from last year, this was a season that no matter how it turned out was going to be different from the rest. And now that everything's all said and done, does it live up to all the hype it's been given? Well, no use in stalling. Let's find out and get into ranking these bad boys.
Turn up.
Yeah, one of these had to be at the bottom. Gonna be completely honest, I was really split as to what to put at the bottom of this list since a lot of these lower episodes would be highlighted basically any other season. And who would have guessed that the episodes towards the bottom of this list were the Marvel vs. DC matchups of the year. But, unfortunately, I do think that Phoenix vs. Raven has to be at the bottom, for the simple reason of, at least for some of the other Marvel vs. DC matchups, like Martian Surfer and Ant-Man vs. Atom, I can at least remember what happened. I'm gonna be honest, despite the death, I barely remember anything about the fight or this episode. I remember some of the jokes in the analysis that made me laugh, but in terms of the animation itself, when it comes to the 3 Marvel vs. DC fights this season, this episode had the worst going for it when it came to memorable fight choreography. Though it does make up for it with its visuals and music though. The visuals with the Phoenix Force and Raven's Bird avatar are stunningly beautiful and really well done. And I like how the track continues to reference both the X-Men and the Teen Titans theme songs throughout its run. But in terms of the actual choreography, there's not a lot to remember. There are a few good moments like Jean breaking free of Raven's illusions, Raven using an entire moon to destroy all of Jean's clones, which was pretty cool, and again, the entire death scene. But overall, it just kind of falls flat compared to an entire season full of episodes with a lot more standout moments. It's not bad by any means, it just has the least amount to talk about, and the misfortune of being in one of the best seasons the series has ever been blessed with.
Nice one! The joke, I mean. Not murder. Murder's not nice.
Whoa, that was deep, bro.
This one probably also shouldn't come as a surprise. While Phoenix vs. Raven is a pretty uninteresting and forgettable fight all around, Martian Manhunter vs. the Silver Surfer to me has a much more memorable fight, with the ending being up there as one of the best of this season, and is basically the main reason that I put it here instead of at the bottom. It probably would be even higher if it weren't for all the issues surrounding its middle half. While it does have a stellar opening and ending, the middle, like I said in my original review, is very lackluster and consists mostly of uninteresting long shots of them flying around and shooting lasers through space. While it does pick up later on, the only thing really of note is the hand-drawn dragon, which is really well made, don't get me wrong, but I think the overall content of the fight really did take a backseat to the whole philosophical, character-driven approach they wanted to do with the episode. And I'm not saying taking a character-driven approach is a bad thing either. Some of Death Battle's best moments come from the characters having moments to be themselves, and you'll definitely see a lot more of me praising that later on in this ranking. What holds Martian Surfer back though is that there just isn't that great of a balance between actual interesting fight stuff and character moments, and to me that's what holds it back. I still think what they did with the characters was really great, and definitely deserves a mention, but in a season that has this many bangers, and also being able to balance character moments and cool fight stuff much more efficiently than this episode, when trying to rank them all, you really kinda dig into the nitty-gritty of these episodes to rank them accordingly. I still love this episode, and it gave me a better appreciation of both characters to an immense degree, but ultimately, like the last one, it just kind of falls flat when making the fight interesting, besides the ending.
Ants! Ammen!
I think everyone saw this coming. Ant-Man vs. Atom being this low on the list shouldn't be a testament as to how bad this episode is, but just as to how great every other episode is. And even then, this episode still has a lot that makes it stand out. Not only does it contain some of the best editing in the series, unlike the other 2 Marvel vs. DC matchups that came out this year, and really unlike any other Marvel vs. DC episode in general, this episode experiments with a lot of different things that make these characters in particular super unique. Sure, other episodes like Tony vs. Lex or Batman have experimented with there being a battle of intelligence as well as pure power, but they don't really take it to the same extent that this episode does. As well as their unique power sets, it just automatically sets up for something that was going to be fundamentally different from any other comic book matchup we've gotten. So the fight, by that logic, is going to be a lot more memorable than Martian Surfer or Jean Raven. From the Newton's cradle stuff, to the zoom out shot, to Adam fighting the horde of ants, and on and on. It also has, in my opinion, one of the most brutal and grotesque deaths that's ever graced the series, not just the season. It may not be the best one this season, but it's definitely the most brutal. And I think that alone helped it stand out from the rest of the stellar lineup of episodes. I'd like to rank this one higher, but when comparing it to the other episodes this season, it doesn't even come close, in my opinion anyway. Which is really a shame because I still really like this episode. It's so different from other comic book matchups we've gotten before, and it has a lot of unique stuff that makes it stand out amongst the crowd. If it was any other season, it would have been a lot higher in my rankings, but unfortunately, like the two below it, it got the short end of the stick by being in the same season as a lot of other bangers.
Hello? That's a mine.
You want it? Come and get it.
Honestly, it's a real shame that this episode is as low as it is, because I have a special soft spot for Kilaa vs. Misa. Not only is it a debut for one of my favorite anime series ever, Hunter x Hunter, it features my favorite character from said series, that being Kilaa. But it really got the short end of the stick by being sandwiched in between two episodes the community views as peak. It's also brought down a bit by having the weakest sprite rigging of any other episode this season, in my opinion. It's not necessarily bad, but you can definitely tell here more than other episodes that it's puppet animation, and it just doesn't really have the same fluidity as something like Gojo vs. Makima, for example. Kilaa also kind of gets dogged on throughout most of the fight and doesn't really get a lot of opportunities to get the upper hand before Misa just snatches it back from him. He does get a lot to do, like his Godspeed stuff and disrupting Misaka's big lightning kaiju, but in terms of the balance of the fight and the back and forth, it mostly favors Misaka. Similarly to Phoenix vs. Raven, this episode is really carried by its track and visuals. Change of Heart is a really good track, and they did a really good job with making all the lightning effects look pretty, though I might also be a bit biased because I really love any character that has lightning powers, so they were kind of cheating by default with that. There is also a lot of creative fight stuff that they use to make it not just a battle of punches and projectiles, but as well as making sure to focus on the science and strategy of the two characters. Since these two, and really their series at large, have a big focus on science and schematics for making their powers work, so we get some bonus points for that. I've also learned a bit of context about the setup of the fight, which was something that I took issue with in my original review. Apparently the coin that Kilaa was taunting Misaka with was a coin that had a lot of significance to her personally, since it was apparently a gift to her clone friend that died or something like that, which I guess would explain why Misaka was so quick to violence, at least to an extent. Though it still doesn't really explain why Kilaa taunted her with it. It's something that I could see early Kilaa doing, but not really something that Kilaa at the later points of the series would do, unless it was something he knew like Gon or Leorio. Overall though, like a lot of the other episodes lower on this list, it really does just kind of pale in comparison to the rest of the episodes that came out later this year. But this episode is still really good in my opinion. It would definitely rank higher up on any other season, at least to me, but that's probably my Hunter x Hunter bias kicking in. But hopefully, as we get more Hunter x Hunter episodes in the future, they will give us an episode that really stands out, because this is a series that absolutely deserves the attention, in my opinion. Just as long as it's not Deku vs. Gon. Please not Deku vs. Gon.
What did you say about my mother?
This is probably one of those rankings that will get me the most weird looks out of everything in this video, because when this episode first came out, everyone was losing their minds of how good it was and how it was the best of the season and whatnot, to which I'm not trying to take away any of that from people. If you think that this is a 10 out of 10 top tier episode, then by all means, you are welcome to think that, have at it. But for me personally, Stitch vs. Rocket was just pretty good. I still enjoyed it well enough on rewatch, but it didn't invoke the same level of emotion from me that other episodes did. Probably because, unlike a lot of the people that watched this episode, I did not grow up with Lilo and Stitch, and truth be told, I haven't even seen it.
Did he just say, aye, he did?
And also probably because at the time the episode came out, it was immediately overshadowed for me by the fact that one of my most wanted episodes was happening immediately afterwards, so that probably definitely messed with my perspective of the episode just a bit. That might be slanderous for some of you, but that movie came out just a little before my time, so any nostalgic value that this episode provided for the vast majority of the viewers was just completely vacant for me. That doesn't mean I didn't necessarily feel anything while watching this. A lot of the enjoyment that I got from this episode just came from watching Rocket being dumbfounded by Stitch's existence. From getting upset about Stitch insulting his mom, which is still probably the funniest line in this entire season, and just constantly getting caught off guard by Stitch and his wacky antics. It's also a different vibe and different kind of fight from anything else this season, with there being a large focus on their gadgets and outside-the-box weaponry, and it leads to a lot of unique interactions that are fun to watch. But besides that, a lot of my opinions on this episode remain mostly the same as my initial review, except for something that I initially missed out on upon my first viewing. When Stitch is being pushed back by the Thanos Buster, I noticed blood splatter coming from his body as he was being pushed back. At first I thought that this was just him taking damage from the blast, but then I looked closer and noticed that it's actually from his additional arms being ripped off from the impact of the gun. That is really brutal, and I'm honestly very surprised that I missed that the first time. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a good episode, but overall it's just kind of held back by being a matchup I don't really have a lot of personal investment in, and there just being a lot of other episodes this season that I just like more for various reasons.
Do you know what a minute is?
What? Of course I do.
I don't think you do.
You know you have a great season lineup when an episode this good isn't even in the upper 8 of the list. I honestly feel really bad putting Friezatron this low, but alas, someone had to be here. Honestly, deciding the middle portion of this list was more difficult than deciding the bottom or the top, because all of these episodes are so great in their own right, yet they all have these little reasons why you could rank one over the other. And while there are some arguments you could make as to why you could rank Friezatron higher, I think this is the decision I'm going to stick with. I remember this episode having relatively mixed reception when it was first announced, and at the time I think it was because we as a collective community were still kind of burned out from the last season's overindulgence of Dragon Ball episodes, so I think most people were quickly annoyed about this episode coming out, and I think that soured its initial reputation as a whole. That, and also the fact that this matchup in and of itself has garnered a bit of negative attention within the last few years thanks to it being mostly quote-unquote debunked, you know, with people like Nemesis making videos on it and whatnot. And I still don't think that means that anyone who likes this matchup or this episode are wrong. Far from it. Everyone is allowed to like whatever matchups they want. Opinions are opinions and all that. And heck, I still even kind of like the matchup myself despite its flaws. And I still love this episode. The fight is still really fun and creative. There's lots of great angles and shots. The lighting and backgrounds are all beautiful. Seeing Martin come back to play Frieza again is always great to see, and the death is stellar. But unfortunately, it's really held back by a lackluster Frieza rundown and really bad pacing for the fight itself. That 20-second Golden Frieza transformation is downright unforgivable. This episode does get bonus points, however, for, like I said before, getting Martin back to play Frieza, and Megatron's speech at the end is worthy of its own highlight. But overall, it just kind of falls flat with a couple of very glaring flaws. If this episode had been paced better, this definitely would have made it even higher on the list, maybe even in the top 5. But with nearly a minute of the fight's runtime being made up of just drawn-out establishing shots and Frieza showing off his golden form, it's still kind of hard to place it any higher over episodes that are just objectively paced better. I still love the episode, and it adds to Dragon Ball's track record of having the best lineup of episodes for a singular series, but for the sake of keeping this list coherent and fair, I have to take these flaws into account and judge them accordingly.
This is one of Reagan's special moves where he throws table salt straight into the eyes of a groomer before she has a chance to apologize with her ukulele.
This is another episode that people might look at me weird for ranking this low. Similarly to Friezatron, I feel bad for ranking this episode this low because I love Gojo, and seeing him represented on Death Battle was a real treat, especially since I really started getting into Jujutsu Kaisen more this year. If only his rundown didn't suck. Yeah, like I said in my original review of the episode, one of the main drawbacks of this episode was that they really dropped the ball on covering Gojo's story properly. It feels like they hardly go into his story in detail at all, and just cover the cliff notes of it, while also doing their absolute best to tiptoe around manga spoilers, to which I appreciate, but it doesn't really help when it comes to pacing and covering stuff. On top of that, upon reflection of the fight, the episode is really carried by the character interactions and the music. Because the actual back and forth, if you isolate it from the actual interactions of the characters, it's just Makima throwing mindless monsters at Gojo and him just ignoring it. Which, in any other episode, would have gotten really old really fast if it weren't for the really great voice acting and writing. Which is one of the reasons I don't really like this matchup as a whole. As someone who really wanted to see Gojo in Death Battle, I didn't want to see him fight Makima, even though that I knew for a fact, and everyone else knew, that Gojo vs. Makima was either going to happen this year or the year after. Mainly because she just doesn't really offer what I would want in a Gojo fight. They were clearly able to make up for it with what they had, but in terms of an actual fight dynamic, Urahara from Bleach or even Buddha from Record of Ragnarok would have had much more better options in terms of a fight dynamic, in my opinion. Simply because they just have more to offer in terms of like an actual back and forth for Gojo that isn't just him ignoring mindless attacks. But alas, we didn't get that, and we had to settle for an episode that was still very good, but in my opinion, shot itself in the foot by picking a Gojo opponent that just had the weaker fight potential. Obviously, that isn't to say that this episode didn't have any good moments at all. Like I mentioned in my original ranking, the beginning and the ending of this fight are stellar, and there are some good moments sprinkled throughout, like the guy on the toilet exploding and Gojo blowing up the Fox Devil from the inside out. But in the end, compared to the rest of the episodes higher on this list when it comes to their choreography, Gojo Makima just doesn't hold up, unfortunately. It does get bonus points for introducing one of my more recent favorite anime, Jujutsu Kaisen to Death Battle, but that isn't really enough to save it from its few but noticeable flaws. Hopefully when they inevitably do Yuji vs Denji, they do a better job of covering the story of Jujutsu Kaisen rather than just covering the bare bones of it. We'll see.
Finally!
Cole vs. Alex is an interesting one because this is the most anticipated episode to ever exist in Death Battle's run except for Galactus vs. Unicron. One of their most highly requested matchups is finally happening, and there's that worry in the back of your head that it isn't going to live up to the hype that's been built up for literally since the show started running. And did it live up to those expectations? I mean, yeah, I'd say so. I had zero investment in this episode going into it. Infamous and Prototype were two series that I had never really heard of until I started looking more into Versus community stuff, and watching channels like Biffweed and Nemesis who would mention in their videos occasionally. And while I thought the episode was decent upon my first viewing, I'm happy to say it's really grown on me. The rundown is really a hit or miss a lot of the time. I like the premise of them using an old script and remaking it, but a lot of the jokes were just kind of meh. Some were better than others, but overall, it just kind of felt like the old script was just an excuse as to why the jokes weren't that funny. But in terms of actually covering the story of the characters, I thought they did a pretty good job of covering all their bases. The fight itself was actually a lot of fun. A lot of the fights up to this point were big cosmic or fantasy battles, so it was a nice palate cleanser to watch a fight that was a bit more low scale. They make a lot of use with Alex's symbiote-like abilities and Cole's different gadgets, as well as a lot of great uses of the environment. There's a few good interactions sprinkled throughout, like their exchange inside the office building, and towards the end where Alex tries to turn Cole to his side, which I thought that entire scene was really cool. A lot of the better fight interactions come from the characters' contrasting personalities or ideals, and watching those contrasting ideals clash in certain ways can be the most interesting aspects of a fight to me. So seeing that fit in here was really cool to see, and Cole's response was really freaking hardcore. And that interaction leads cleanly into the climax of the fight, which really elevated the episode a lot for me just by itself. The way the music swells as Cole absorbs all the power from the radio tower behind him and forms this freaking sweet energy swords. If you guys didn't know this about me already, I have a really big love for characters with electricity-based powers, so Cole was practically cheating with all the stuff he was pulling off during this fight. As well as the track. Inhuman very quickly dethroned Fireborn as my favorite track of the season by a significant margin despite the very steep competition this season, and really helps elevate the fight in every way imaginable. The few things that hold it back from being higher on this list is, for one, like I said before, I have no emotional attachment to either of these characters or their franchises, and I think the death was a bit lackluster, with the exception of Cole's final line, as well as the analysis, like I mentioned earlier, which was kind of meh. Though given the reception that this episode has been receiving, it seems that people who have been waiting years for this episode to happen are happy with the final product, which I'm glad to see. Hopefully the ballot winner for next season will be just as good, if not better. Please be good. Please be good!
You don't know what I am. You don't know what I can do. It's cool, Rick. I'm Doctor Who in this
Man, the latter half of this season really caught me off guard with the episodes that came out. After the ballot episodes were out of the way, we were slapped across the face with highly requested matchups back to back to back to back, with Rick vs. the Doctor being one of those episodes. It honestly feels criminal putting this episode at number 8 on this ranking, but just let that be a testament as to how great this season was in terms of its quality. This episode goes all in on the classic time-traveling, universe-hopping sci-fi shenanigans that these two are associated with, and I'm all here for it. Between the track, the gadgets used, and the overall vibe of the episode, this really did feel like a perfect blend between the two franchises. The rundowns were really fun. It covered the characters and their vast arsenals and stories very well, and actually somewhat got me interested in checking out Doctor Who. Not really much else to say about it other than that, I just really liked it. And the fight was really impressive. The animation style fits Rick and Morty so well, to the point where a lot of the animation and shots look like they came straight out of the show. All the different locations they traveled to throughout the fight was really fun and made each segment feel unique in their own fun way. And the way Rick and the Doctor's contrasting personalities and ideals go back and forth with each other was also really fun to watch unfold. Like I said before, watching contrasting personalities and ideals lock horns like this is always very fun for me to see. One thing that did kind of throw me off though was Rick's voice actor. He's not bad at all, and some of his lines sound very in tune with how Rick's actual voice actor delivers lines, but some of his other line deliveries just sound off. Like some other performances this season kind of walk that line between being similar to the original voice, but also feels different in its own unique way. Rick definitely comes off as more of a guy doing an impression of Rick, rather than a guy doing a Rick Sanchez voice. Does that make sense? It's kind of hard to explain, but however you say it, it threw me off. Voice acting aside, there's a lot of great details that, even as a non-fan of both franchises, I could appreciate. The biggest one that I didn't notice upon first viewing was that the Doctor does not throw a single punch throughout the entire fight, and doesn't even land the killing blow. He lets Rick do that himself, which is nice that they went out of their way to make sure that the Doctor doesn't break character to win. I also liked Rick showing up at the end after the death as a ghost, not even mad that he lost, but more mad that Morty might forget him, which I thought was a nice character moment and a nice little way to add a bit of levity to a very intense final section of the fight. It's honestly a shame that this episode isn't even in the top 5 because I really enjoyed it. The only real reason it's as low as it is mainly just, like a lot of these, lack of personal investment in these characters, though like I said before, it did get me interested in checking out Doctor Who, so maybe as time goes on and I get more acquainted with both of these franchises, my opinion on this episode will strengthen. Who knows?
So, which one of you is Goku?
You know, I don't really think I gave Guts vs. Demitri enough credit when it first came out. Sure, I enjoyed it, but I didn't think that it compared to the other episode that had come out earlier this year. But upon rewatching it, it really grew on me. Xander's direction he decided to go through with Guts isn't quite my cup of tea, but he still gets some great lines in. That entire scene where it zooms in on them and they combine their iconic lines together is a season highlight for me. It is executed brilliantly. The fight choreography overall isn't exactly groundbreaking, but it is elevated by the track and the overall vibe and tone of the fight. Sure, there are a few janky shots here and there with the models, but it's not super distracting, and even then, they're not on screen for very long. It was pretty cool watching Guts' almost Batman-like gadgets and stuff bounce off of Dimitri's magic. Also like how they both try to play a bit more strategically, trying to outmaneuver them with their respective abilities, but once they enter their elevated states, it is just a no-holds-barred, blade versus blade fight to the death, and I think that is brilliant. But yeah, all of my original opinions about this fight still hold up overall. I still think the initial killing blow is a bit weak, even though what came after was really great, and like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of Xander's take on Guts, but it's still an amazing episode. It's weird, I don't really have a whole lot to say on this one, even though it's one of the more higher up ones. I guess I have read a bit of Berserk since watching this episode for the first time, which helped me understand some of the inside jokes and more of Guts' character, which helped me appreciate his side a bit more. I still haven't played Three Houses. I guess now that this episode has gotten more popular, I'd like to see more Berserk and Fire Emblem episodes in the future. I don't know who else you could bring in on Berserk's side besides Casca and Griffith, but hey, it'd be cool. And Fire Emblem is just a massive franchise. There's a lot of characters you can bring from that.
What you about to do? Leave! Now leave, nigga!
Man, this season was just full of surprises. Pretty sure disregarding a couple of matchups, this entire season was chock full of matchups that had been highly requested for the better half of a year or two, and in some cases way more than that. And of course, to end it off, they decided to make the season finale the most highly requested matchup in the show's history, Galactus vs. Unicron. This really took me off guard. For one, 2 Transformers episodes in one season, which is crazy because that's the exact amount of Transformers episodes that existed before this season dropped. But it did make a lot of sense in hindsight. With the episode before this being one of the most ambitious and legacy-driven episodes Death Battle's ever made, this was really one of the only episodes they could have done that wouldn't have gotten completely overshadowed by the previous episode if they did do that. And boy howdy, did this episode feel like a finale. For one, the rundowns were amazing. They really went all out with selling how incomprehensibly powerful these two guys are, and honestly covered their stories really well. Unicron's in particular might be my favorite rundown of the entire season so far, portraying him as death incarnate, which is sold even more by Boomstick's final speech about him at the end, which was really well written and really helped sell the character for me. And the fight follows through on that hype. I've seen some discussion of this fight describing it as basically Thanos versus Darkseid but good, and that's really the best way to put it. One issue that I and a lot of the community take with a lot of these larger cosmic level fights is that they hardly ever reach that crazy cosmic scale that we all know these characters are capable of reaching. The worst thing that'll happen is that a moon or a planet gets destroyed. Sure, there are some exceptions in certain episodes that do go higher than that. Heck, the previous episode ended with all of reality getting wiped out. But Galactus vs. Unicron takes that to the next level. They are actually throwing planets and even galaxies at each other and swatting suns away like they're made of paper. And it's really cool to watch. Like, there's a shot where Unicron grabs the sun, crushes it into a black hole, and punches Galactus with it. That's super freaking raw. Like, it's freaking awesome. And it gets even crazier towards the end of the fight where they start growing in size even more, and they evolve from throwing planets to throwing entire galaxies at each other. taking that term very literally, I see. This fight really goes all out, and feeling this is truly an all-out battle between two godly beings with the entire universe just stuck in the middle. And that's without even me mentioning the gorgeous visuals. This episode just wouldn't feel as impactful without the absolutely amazing visual effects. From the space backgrounds, as well as the stars and galaxies that surround them while they fight, to all of their energy effects, it's all just very gorgeous and pretty to look at. I also like how they just start creating poetry while they beat each other up towards the latter half of the fight. I don't know who came up with that, but having them have a freaking rap battle while they punch each other is so freaking funny. And also really, really cool at the same time. It's weird, but it's awesome. I love it. The death is also pretty cool. I'd say it's one of the, in terms of like the scale of like the deaths this season, it's kind of in the middle. I don't think it was the best at all. And I think it loses points for it just being a boring incineration death. But I think the setup paired with Galactus' final line more than makes up for it. In short, this episode felt more like a finale than some of the most beloved finales in this series, purely with just the scale and climactic feel of it all. It somehow felt like the culmination of the entire season. Most of the season had been either pretty low-scale fights without much crazy destruction, and any sense of cosmic fights were pretty limited in their destruction, with the exception of Goku vs. Superman. This one goes all out in their crazy cosmic fighting, and literally embracing the term throwing galaxies at each other, and in my opinion, fully lives up to the hype that surrounded this matchup for the better half of the last few years. Between this and Cole vs. Alex earlier this season, all we need now is Simon vs. Kyle to be made, and we can finally put the entire trinity of "these matchups will happen this year, bro, I swear" episodes to bed, and we can move on from this era of matchups and put them to bed.
Were you killed?
Sadly, yes. But I lived.
God, this episode is still just so cool. This episode probably wouldn't rank as high on other lists compared to mine, but I do not care. This episode is just so much fun. The fun back and forth with their magic and skills, the amazing backing track, the great lightning and effects. It's just everything. It does everything right. It's just such a cool episode. I still think it was kind of funny that this was the second episode of the season, because they just put out some of their best work this season at the very beginning. The climax of this fight I still think is one of the best of the season, though I definitely think it's gone down some, simply just because more episodes have come out now that have better climaxes in my opinion. And now it's even better for me because now I know the context of the ending. Apparently, the two snake guys that they talk about in the rundown of the Chosen Undead are siding with one of the combatants, respectively. And this all ties back to the ending of Dark Souls 1, which is pretty cool in my opinion. It's a cool idea to try and implement the actual story of these characters into the fight, instead of them just walking around in a completely neutral territory unrelated to both characters and them just deciding to fight. Obviously, I'm exaggerating and that doesn't apply to every episode, but I still thought the way that they decided to handle that setup was really cool and unique. I still love the effects of this episode. It's definitely gotten shown up by later episodes in this season, but the way they do the lighting and all the magic effects are still so cool to me. And that shot where they both clash with their lightning effects is still one of my favorite moments of this season to me. They really weren't kidding when they compared these two to Hercules and Sun Wukong in the conclusion, because they really do go all out in framing this like a battle between two demigod-like figures. And I think when looking at it in that context really helps elevate this fight in terms of its scale. I really hope we get more Soulsborne game pro tags in Death Battle in the future, so we can give more episodes like this. Breath of the Wild Link versus the Tarnished is one I really like, and one I'd really like to see in the future. And they did a cast episode on it, so maybe in a season or two we'll get it? But the moral of the story, just let Liam direct episodes fully from now on. This was a passion project on his end, and it really shows. And between this and Dio Card, he is 2 for 2 on his personal passion project matchups he got to make an episode out of, and they both were amazing.
What is the dog doing?
What the dog doing? Defending his country.
Yeah, were you really expecting anything different? Scooby vs. Courage the Cowardly Dog swept the community off its feet with the sheer spectacle and off-the-walls combat that it contained. And after all the hype has died down and stuff, I'm happy to say that this episode still holds up extraordinarily well. It contains some of the funniest gags, and also simultaneously some of the hypest moments, and overall just some of the highest highs the show has seen, all complemented by some of the best animation the show has just ever seen. This isn't like Martian vs. Surfer where it's like 1 or 2 good parts and the rest is forgettable. This entire fight is full of memorable moments. The thumb war, the door gag bit, the triangle dance thing, and of course, the Asura's Wrath Punch that had no right to be as cool as it was. And it also has one of the more unique deaths in the series, with the fight being an honest-to-God draw because, well, according to the team, that was the only conclusion they could reasonably come up with because both had such off-the-walls durability and hacks that they couldn't kill each other. Which is kind of crazy because we've never had an episode in the show's history that concludes like this that isn't for the sake of a bit. And I think I mentioned this in my review, but I'm kind of glad that the episode ended like that because, let's be honest, we don't want to see either of these guys die, do we? Truthfully, the only reason that this isn't higher up is due to a lack of personal investment in both characters, as well as the next 3 episodes being matchups that I care a lot more about personally. Though this episode does lay the groundwork for the future of a ton of Toon Force matchups. I do hope future episodes like Wily vs. Tom, for example, go out of their way to make the episode feel more distinct and unique, and not just copy and pasting what this episode did in particular. But we'll just have to see.
Yo, dudes, the Empire's pretty chill. Maybe you could, join it or something.
People who have been following me for a while, or have seen my numerous top favorite matchup lists over the last few months, know that Darth Vader vs. Obito is one of my favorite matchups. Not only does it involve one of my favorite villains ever in Darth Vader, but also just opens itself up to this very tragic and cinematic battle, complete with fun back and forth with their respective powers and a very tragic ending. And the episode of this matchup delivered on everything I previously just mentioned. If you remember my review of this episode from earlier this year, I spent the majority of the episode just gushing about how good it was, and a lot of it still holds up. The voice acting, the animation, the back and forth, the music, all of it. Vader's inevitable line is still up there as one of my favorite lines of the whole season for a plethora of reasons. And the ending I still think holds up as one of the best deaths of the season as well, in spite of the competition that progressively got steeper and steeper as the rest of the season came out. A lot of these early episodes I noticed got really overshadowed as the latter half of the season started to come out, which included episodes like Bill Cord and Scooby vs. Courage that quickly became considered some of the best episodes in the show's history. Which is kind of a shame because I still think Vader vs. Obito is an amazing episode. Obviously a lot of that comes from my own personal bias and attachment towards the matchup, but I also just really enjoy the vibe and direction this episode took with its fight. And it's kind of a shame that it got overlooked so quickly. But not by me, I still think this episode is amazing, despite me ranking it higher than I would imagine most people would normally rank it. This is one of the first times in recent memory where a matchup I really liked and really wanted got onto the show, and I'm really glad it didn't disappoint.
Waiter, there's a Bill Cipher in my soup! Hey, stop drinking my pool!
Ranking any season of Death Battle is kind of strange, because most people when they're ranking any season of the show have at least some overlap with everyone else, especially when you start getting close to the top or close to the bottom. And I feel like Season 10 has that issue, times 10, because I feel like everyone and their mom was able to predict that Bill Cord would be in the top 3 of everyone's lists, including mine. And can you really blame me? This episode has it all. A fun and unique analysis, amazing animation, great casting, gorgeous visuals, great gags, and a great and unique death that I don't think we've ever gotten on this show before. A death where the loser technically wins in the end. I've really been enjoying Death Battle's attempts to experiment with different kinds of endings to their fights, all of which led to great success, at least to me. But this one is one of my favorites, simply because it's so different from any other death in the series. The idea of the loser getting the last laugh in some way or another is really interesting as an idea for a character death in the series, and I think they really did a good job executing it. From the build-up to the reveal itself, it all just flows very well. And obviously, there's the entire animation itself, which really does set in perspective how far Death Battle has come from a quality perspective. The amount of different animation styles that are crammed into this one fight is great and helps add to the overall feeling of weirdness and chaos that kind of comes with these two characters. I'm really glad that both of the ballad episodes ended up being really well received, because if not, we probably wouldn't have gotten it again this year or the next coming year. I think this idea of letting fans decide on an episode for the next season is a fantastic idea that I really hope continues for as long as Death Battle decides to stay running, because it was a smashing success both last year and this year. And if all future ballad episodes are as good as Bill Cord and Colex, then we are going to be getting some absolute bangers in the show's future.
Try to beat the shit out of Superman. I say you can't do it. Can't do it.
Oh yeah? Well, I don't like your hair, Mr. White Boy.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys were expecting. Goku vs. Superman, I think more than any other modern episode of Death Battle, shows just how far this show has come, both in terms of quality and of the people and team itself. What started as a fun project between two friends now evolved into a huge team effort, creating some of the best animation YouTube has ever seen. If someone were to ask me what Death Battle does, I would show them this episode, after showing them Power Rangers vs. Voltron. This, more than any other episode this season or the series in general, feels like the utmost amount of love and passion was put into making sure that it was the best version of itself, and they succeeded beautifully. I already went into this episode in detail on my independent reviews, so if you want more details on my thoughts on that episode, go watch that. But for those who have already seen it, you know already that this has quickly entered my top 5 favorite episodes of this series. It's still not enough to top Power Rangers vs. Voltron for me, but it is dang close. This episode just has a strong sense of finality, a sense of climactic resolution, especially as the fight crescendos towards the end, to the point where if the series ended here, I would have been completely satisfied, coming full circle with all 3 versions of this episode and whatnot. It's kind of funny actually. I don't really have a whole lot to say on this episode. I said basically everything I wanted to say in my solo review. Plus, I'm sure anything extra I could say about this episode you guys probably already know. This really is an episode that doesn't need a whole lot of elaboration. Everyone just universally agrees that this is just one of the best episodes that Death Battle's ever put out, and it's a remake of Goku vs. Superman of all things. And I couldn't think of anything else more fitting to top off the best season of Death Battle than that. So with all that said and done, do I think this is Death Battle's best season yet? Yes, absolutely. So much heart and effort went into all of these episodes, to the point where even though I criticized every episode, specifically the lower ones, I wouldn't call any of these episodes bad. Some of them just have more flaws than others, which for a ranking like this, you kind of have to pay more attention to make a proper ranking of these episodes. Death Battle just seems to be getting better and better, with each season being better than the last for the last few years. And if this season was as great as it was, then I cannot wait to see what they have in store for Season 11. Alright, now before I wrap up, let me go over some other stuff real quick. Tom vs. Wily winning the Champions battle is freaking awesome. I would hope that for another Toon Force matchup like this, I would have preferred them to take their time with it, but I'm not complaining about Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry being covered in Death Battle. As for the ending teaser, I do not know. A lot of speculation I've seen regarding the tarot cards points to the first 3 cards representing a specific matchup / character, specifically the Fool being a reference to Joker from Persona 5. Or it could be a matchup from Persona 3, since I think tarot cards play a big role in that game too. There's also a bunch of flashing images that also probably allude to different matchups. I've seen talk of Blue Beetle as well as a few others. One of the images has been identified as the guy from Greek mythology that pushes the boulder up the hill and whatnot. I forgot his name. I'll put it up on screen if I can remember to. But I think it's all too vague to really make any proper guesses. I probably won't be making a dedicated speculation video like I did last year, since I feel like it's a bit too late for that, but I will throw up my own little Season 11 bingo thing right now to give you kind of a general idea of where my thoughts lie. And with that, that is all from me. Check out some of my other videos, like my most recent video, where I talked about my favorite media from 2023, and that's about it. I will see you all later.